All right. It wouldn't be a self-storage summit or online conference, whatever you want to call it, if you weren't covering some legal aspects of the self-storage industry. So I made sure I went out and got Scott Zucker to give us a great presentation on conducting lien sales. So here's going to be a little snippet, a little sneak peek on Scott's presentation. So I hope you really enjoy it. It gets about 5 minutes long here. And again, if you haven't registered yet, please go to the selfstoragesummit.com. Get registered today. And it starts November 19th to the 21st. 3 full days. A lot of information. All right. So this is just tip of the iceberg, one of the 30 presentations coming at you. All right. Let's get to it.
And welcome to the Self Storage Show.
You want to make sure you're covered in conducting lien sales. In this session of the Self Storage Summit, it's going to show you exactly that. I'm Jim Ross, your host on today's summit. I'm happy to introduce you to a legendary expert in all things self-storage, Scott Zucker. Hey, Scott, thanks for taking the time for being on the summit.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so kind of right off the bat, I know who you are. Everyone in the storage world also know who you are, but just kind of give a brief little intro and a little bio on who you are and how you got into storage.
Well, it's been a fun ride. Started working with self-storage operators from the legal side back in 1987. So it's over 30 years now working with operators and developers in the construction of their facilities, the management of their facilities, the buy and sell of their facilities. But no matter what, and I know that's the topic of our conversation today, most of the questions we get are about the regulatory compliance side of their business, which is the self-storage lien laws that they have to follow for the operation of their business. And we've been writing about it and guiding clients through their problems in not following the laws in certain instances over the last few decades. So it's a good topic. It's an important topic, and it's one that keeps people out of trouble if they follow the law.
Yeah, and that's, again, being the legal guy, I know you have a lot of knowledge, but when it comes to liens, that's what affects everybody. If you're in storage and running a business, you can't get around it. So
right.
It's vitally important. That's why I wanted to make sure you were on this. So thank you. So I guess we'll kind of start from the beginning and kind of go from there. Can you kind of, I guess, explain, the concept of, liens first off?
Well, it's sort of an interesting story because you look at this industry, and the uniqueness of this industry is that it is governed by state lien laws. Self-storage is unique in the context that we have self-help remedies for tenants that don't pay their bills compared to other real estate industries that have to go to court to enforce their rights against a tenant who doesn't pay their bills. So in self-storage, we were given these statutory rights to send notices, publish advertisements, and ultimately sell a tenant's property through their own actions, a self-help remedy, without having to go through the courts. And that makes us unique. It also puts special pressure on us to make sure we follow the laws carefully and fully to enforce those rights, to sell the tenant's goods, to recoup the lost rent that's been suffered by the operator. So each state, except for the state of Alaska, has a self-storage lien law. And I'll talk a little about Alaska maybe later, that it has a contractual lien law element to it, but each of the states have their own specified Self-Storage Facility Act law that governs, in some parts, the rental agreements, which discloses for their operators and for their tenants that they have these lien rights. It must be expressed in the rental agreements, and then goes through a very clear series of steps they must take to enforce their rights when a tenant isn't paying. And they need to follow their particular unique state lien law to enforce their rights. If they're a multi-state operator, they may have to do it two different ways if they're in two different states, but they have to follow those state lien laws. And that's what makes this industry relatively unique, to have a law that governs those actions by those operators.
I know we'll probably get into this, but I find it comforting a lot of time that it's actually kind of laid out for you, follow A, B, C, and D, but it's still, you shake your head how many people don't follow. So that's why we're doing this.
Right. And it's not, done out of malice. Sometimes when these laws aren't followed, sometimes the circumstances would indicate maybe the tenant abandoned their property or somehow waived these rights. But at the end of the day, they have to follow the law in order to feel comfortable that they're protected under the law if the tenant comes back later and says, what happened to my property?
Yep. Oh, that happens. So again, I mean, we all want everyone to pay. Obviously, that's why we're in storage. We want everyone to pay their rent, but you always get the people that don't. That's just
Yes.
as of
Yes.
life. They don't pay their rent. So I mean, what happens then? When someone fails to pay on the rent? Oh, now what?
Well, and that's exactly what the law is for.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is there's a little bit of a mix-up sometimes about tenants that are difficult tenants or bad tenants or troublesome tenants that they may want to invoke the lien law to remove that tenant from their facility when they've otherwise breached the lease for non-monetary reasons. Now, the lien law is set up only for people that don't pay their rent. So we kind of have to segregate out the troublesome tenants that operators want to deal with separate from the law, as from, just like you said, the tenants that don't pay their rent. And then when you find those tenants that don't pay the rent, the operators need to go through a step-by-step process even before they get to the lien enforcement aspect, which is the notification to their tenant that, hey, you haven't paid your rent, you got to pay the rent, or we're going to have to do something by enforcing our lien right over your property. And when we talk about notification to pay rent these days, there's just so much out there that an operator can do. You've got obviously phone calls and emails. You can operate using text messaging, and certainly letters that are sent to the customer to remind them that the rent's paid, rent needs to be paid. And if it's not paid, then they'll have the right to enforce the lien over their stored property. But look, I am a gigantic advocate for the fact of operators will do better getting their paid rent from their customers than ever going through the lien sale. They'll lose money
Oh, yeah.
ultimately with the time and expense of their managers to deal with a lien process. So if they can use that time effectively to get their tenants to pay, they're going to be much better off in the long run. But it is an obligation on those operators to reach out, try to find their tenants, communicate with their tenants, and they have all that technology at their fingerprints to do it. At their fingers to do it with email and texting and phone calls and letters.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for supporting the show. I want to let you know that we've just opened up our brand new free private Facebook group. There I'll be having some extra special content not found anywhere else. If you really want your facility to be a success in today's market, then this is going to be the place for you. You can request to join us at selfstoragecommunity.com or search for Self Storage Domination Community on Facebook.